Treyarch might have one of the most fascinating underdog stories in gaming so far. Founded in 1996 and acquired by Activision in 2001, the games initially consisted of mostly one-off IPs, licensed sports games or movie tie-ins, one of which was Spider-Man 2, the old one on the PS2, which arguably had the best web swinging in the entire series. Treyarch put out their first Call of Duty game in 2005 and since then has pretty much gotten an card-only studio after World at War. They used to be the studio that mostly lived in the shadow of the great Infinity Ward, but eventually took their template, ironed out its issues, and decided to innovate on them in ways the other studios would just straight up copy from them years later. And seeing their growth to becoming the people's favorite developer out of the big three is fascinating to see. Treyarch's first attempt at a card game was Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1, which was a PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube spin-off from the original CARD 2. It was a solid first attempt, featuring its own full-scale campaign and multiplayer reminiscent of its next-gen counterpart. Activision were satisfied and thus saw the potential in Treyarch making more of them. In 2006, Infinity Ward wanted to completely reinvent the franchise but would need an extra year to do so. Activision granted them the wish, but of course they couldn't miss out on 1 year of earnings for anything that makes them a lot of money. A habit which killed two of their other IPs and still weren't scared to repeat just a year ago. So naturally, Treyarch were ordered to put out a filler title in just 9 months, which was Call of Duty 3. CARD 3 was an obvious rush job. It suffered from performance issues on every version, it didn't have a PC release, a forgettable campaign and QTEs that rival Resident Evil 4 levels of annoying. And you had to hold the left stick in order to sprint, which is the biggest sin in any console shooter you could do. Multiplayer was kind of interesting since it had 24 players, which I think for the console versions at least was a big deal. I think until Blackout the player counts never really went past 18 anyway. Infinity Ward in the meantime was working on CARD 4, which was that reinvention in the modern setting that Treyarch was building their next game off of. Which is where we arrive at World at War, which didn't have the greatest timing when it first came out. Something that many people today didn't know or already forgot is that there was a time in the very early 2000s where the market was just oversaturated with World War II shooters. CARD 4 was the breath of fresh air everyone was waiting for, but Treyarch was still working on another World War II title after the train had long departed. But one hell of a World War II shooter it was, almost like the perfect swan song for that era. The game might be one of the most brutal and haunting depictions of its conflict in gaming history, slowly setting the roots for the psychological elements Treyarch campaigns usually implement. The multiplayer was kind of like a mix between the old school and CARD 4, borrowing its custom classes, perks and streaks, but also still having vehicular combat. It wasn't too popular at the time and a lot of people preferred CARD 4, but it was fun regardless. It just felt very late to the party compared to all the other shooters that were coming out at the time. There was however a little bonus left, just a small little side dish, a dessert, you know, nothing too special. This is where it all started with zombies. It was the third co-op addition to the game which almost didn't make the cut due to Activision. Only after the agreement that they wouldn't market this mode and keep it a secret until you beat the campaign would it stay inside the game. This is still the rawest form of zombies you could get, where all of the horror elements were still intact and the individual features like perks, no wonder weapons and Pack-a-Punch were introduced map after map. There were also quality of life features missing that we now take for granted today, like I forgot quick revive for straight users on solo in this game. It's interesting to dive back into and really witness how grotesque and horror-like it still was before they dialed it back with each entry. And while Martus back then were standard for Call of Duty, it was bigger than before when they were made compatible with zombies. With the next game however, they really managed to carve out their own identity, which helped them step away from Infinity Ward's shadow. Black Ops 1 had high expectations to fulfill, and it matched Modern Warfare 2's popularity effortlessly. Its gameplay framework is reminiscent of MW2, but with a lot of its problems fixed. That was like a common thing for Treyarch at the time and still somewhat is today, basically fixing Infinity Ward's bullshit a year or two later. Killstreaks and grenade launchers have a match delay counter before they can be used. Commando, Danger Close and One Man Army have all been removed, and Scavenger doesn't resupply your noob tubes anymore. Killstreaks can only be earned now with actual gun kills. Shotguns are a primary weapon now, it was the first to bring in custom bots for multiplayer, and tactical insets can be destroyed to prevent spawn killing. It also laid the groundwork for player customization in future Call of Duty games. Your player model changes depending on your first perk. You can choose face paints. It introduced the gold camo, and had the best looking one at that. You can put your custom made clan tag and emblem onto your weapon. But obviously it wasn't perfect. Campers who ran the ghost perk with motion sensors were a huge issue.
Guy is doing, but oh, I'm about to call the hounds in on his bitch ass. So he sprays that poor bastard in the back, and he's going beast mode on my puppies. Oh my goodness.
The online stability and hit detection might have been the worst in card history, and the notorious connection interrupted logo became a meme. TREYARCH at the time hated quickscoping and made sure for it to be way harder than an MW2. Not impossible, but harder. And the way they went to approach that was maybe the dumbest way possible.
So if you're running and you keep moving, your bullet will not go where your crosshairs are at. But if you run and you stop, your bullet will always go where your crosshairs are at. It really is. As long as you stop, your bullet will go where you aim at.
I tested it again in 2024 if it still works that way. Yep, still absolute bullshit. But despite that, it's still remembered fondly. Same goes to the campaign. It took a unique psychological approach to Call of Duty campaigns, taking place in the 1960s and taking covert operations, the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis and CIA mind control as its main topics. It has a very distinct identity from its predecessors, which already starts at the main menu, which might be one of the most unique in gaming history. And also one of the creepiest. Black Ops 1 launched the popularity of zombies to the moon, literally. Kino der Toten might as well have been everyone's starting point. It had a great map selection. The Thundergun might be the most iconic wonder weapon of all time, besides maybe the ray gun which appears on every map ever. This is where the full-scale Easter egg main quest started with Ascension. The story was still kind of cryptic, but TREYARCH made more of an intentional effort to expand it further, making sure more and more questions get answered. It's the most unadulterated, pure version of zombies with all of its essentials intact that you can play. Black Ops 1 was a very strong entry, but TREYARCH would later prove that they weren't even in their final form just 2 years later, and then go on in 2012 to deliver which might be the actual peak of the entire series. Black Ops 2 was a huge deal when it first dropped, and I don't think anyone is denying that. Its multiplayer is the best it's ever been in the entire series, featuring a whole roster of classic maps that even get remade to this day, and also the worst map in the game, Aftermath, still probably clearing the best map out of a modern Call of Duty game. There were huge new innovations like the new score streak system, which now also rewards objective plays for your kill streaks, and the other being the Pick 10 system. Rather than being required to choose a primary, sidearm, grenade, tactical and 3 perks, you can choose to ditch anything you don't need for an extra attachment, perk or whatever it is. It was a genius addition because not only did it allow for more flexibility, it also greatly reduced the amount of grenade spam or stun grenade spam unless you encounter trick shotters. They also fixed ghosts by making you invisible on the radar when you moved around the map. It was the card that introduced league or ranked play, and its DLC lineup was super strong as well. It wasn't perfect of course, the LZ Target Finder combo is very cheap even though the people that use it are mostly just not good at the game, so they're barely an issue if you're somewhat skillful. But the C4 spam? Holy crap, these guys are sweaty.
Friendly counter UAV inbound.
Flak Jacket and Toughness were almost a must in this game. Campaign was the most ambitious it's ever been. The first card to introduce a futuristic setting in 2025, alongside the missions set in the past in the late 80s that tie them all together. It's the first card to introduce different choices that lead to multiple endings, and also challenges and custom classes all for replayability. You can tell they were trying to turn campaign into a more than one and done thing that it usually was. And maybe for some people it worked. It had plenty of memorable segments. Menendez was one of the best villains in the game's history, and it's gonna be interesting how Black Ops 6 and 7 will tie those games' events with their own. Zombies was a very experimental step from BO1. Transit was a huge thing when it came out, as it was a large area cut into individual places that all could be played on its own. The execution of it could have been better, definitely. But individual pieces like Town Survival or Grief were just too good to be hated on. This time Zombies ran on the multiplayer engine, meaning theater mode works on it, leaderboards were expanded and ranking was also introduced. What's interesting is how stylistically all over the place it felt. In BO2 it's most apparent that two different developer teams worked on the post-launch zombie maps, The Zombies team handled all the Victor stuff, so Transit, Die Rise and Buried, while the campaign guys handled Mob of the Dead and Origins, which were ironically the most beloved maps. Mao's premise of a hellish version of Alcatraz is interesting on its own, and its level design hit that perfect middle ground of not too easy and not too difficult, that I think future Zombies games should be striving for. Origins was the most complex Zombies has ever been at that time and laid the groundwork for how Zombies in BO3 was gonna work. And since I already mentioned BO3, this was their game in the Exosuit trilogy that came after Advanced Warfare. And man, was it an ambitious one. The total package you got was ridiculous. On launch you had what was one of the longest campaigns to this date, with the return of the 4-player co-op feature, the usual multiplayer experience, 2 zombie maps with dead-ups too, and free run, which we should have got more maps out of, and last but least, a remix of the original campaign with rewritten and re-recorded cutscenes and zombies to fight against. I know what you're thinking, not everything we got was up to standards. The campaign might have been packed with side content and customizability, and the return of co-op was great, but the story was a complete mind-bending head-scratcher where you need to read an internet summary to even understand what actually happened in it. Nightmares was pretty much a waste of time because while I understand Treyarch wanting to deliver the idea of a zombies campaign, especially after so many people asked about one, if it's gonna end up this half-baked and this uninteresting, then those resources could have been put into something elsewhere. Multiplayer was fine. It obviously doesn't rank among the greats, and the loot boxes and microtransactions weren't doing it any favors. But the zombies was the saving grace for this game. Shadows, The Giant, Der Eisendrache, Setsubo, Gorod, Revelations, and if you're still not convinced how great this lineup is, then what about Kino, Nacht, Moon, Origins, fucking Zombies Chronicles, you get the point. What I'm saying is that this is the perfect entry point for Call of Duty Zombies because it offers so many experiences that appeal to every type of player. It had the biggest hype surrounding it from a community standpoint and, thanks to mod tours, still retains a strong player base almost 10 years later. And we're still getting huge projects and remakes to this day. Black Ops 3 was a game where Treyarch might have slightly overestimated themselves, but it still got so many things right and offered a complete package that many later cards struggle to amount to, including Treyarch themselves. Now Black Ops 4 is an interesting case. It dropped the extra movement from BO3 for classic boots on the ground gameplay, which was a good change. But it retained the specialist format and took it even further. This could have easily been Black Ops 2.5 if it wasn't so incredibly unbalanced. The gunplay and movement was so on point. Manual healing and 100 HP in multiplayer was a change that you had to get used to, but understandable once you did. It's the first time you had actual gunfights in a series. You could escape a losing battle, heal yourself and try to challenge in a different way. Accuracy mattered more than ever. Corner campers could be turned on easier. Not that many campers existed anyway, this might have been the most aggressive, most active card in gameplay history. And I loved that for it. The maps weren't anything noteworthy, but not incredibly trash. They almost had a working formula, so why did they ruin it with all the specialists? There were so many cheap deaths that you could do nothing against just because another player existed for long enough in a match. I didn't have anything against the ones that were more team oriented like Crash or Recon, but I don't think my brain has been wired the same after having to deal with Tempest, Turk, Battery or Zero this many times. Its monetization model was also trash. Only 1 year after launch did they make it so guns are directly earnable through gameplay contracts. And in a time where everyone pretty much dropped the season pass model, Activision was still adamant on selling one for $50, and that shit never went on sale. The eventual prestigious key rand was the thing everyone was waiting for with every new season. I prayed for his health back then.
We're gonna repackage something that everybody already fucking had and resell it to you. That's bullshit, dude. And 2,000 COD points? Are you goddamn kidding me? $20. In Black Ops 3, I could go spend 200 COD points and wipe my ass with the 3 camos that come out of it that are bullshit duplicates for crypto keys.
The campaign was also completely absent. According to leaks, there were different campaign ideas they were working with, like a 2v2 specialist story with actual missions inside them. But it never fully worked out in development. They were running late, so quickly they started working on a Battle Royale as its third mode. Blackout had its potential cut short. It was still locked behind a $60 price tag. It had only survived for about a year until Activision finally figured it out with Warzone. And with Zombies, oh, where do I start with Zombies? It had 2 storylines, one of which was cancelled midway through and the other one got its budget cut short and told to be wrapped up pretty much immediately. The launch lineup was strong on paper with 3 full-scale maps and 1 bonus map as a DLC, but one of them is a botched remake, the good remake was paid DLC, and 1 good and bad chaos map each. I don't hate Voyage as much as others do, I just think it's borderline unplayable without stamina. But 9 is an insanely fun pick-up and play map. The idea of a filled coliseum just watching you kill zombies and finish trials is really cool to me, and its layout was great too. The new gameplay mechanics were also very controversial. You now need to bring a fixed loadout of 4 perks along with you. You could use Perkaholics or Secret Sauce, but that would take extra points or a rare elixir, in order to get more than 4 perks. Point maximization has been removed. The HUD is more cluttered than it's ever been. There's too many failsafes like anywhere but here or specialist weapons you already earn on spawn. But it also has some good changes like choosing your starting weapon. Gun variety in general is much stronger than in BO3. The Kraken might not be the strongest wonder weapon, but a portable ship cannon just goes hard as fuck. And I know some people have very nostalgic opinions about 5, but Classified might be my favorite remake of all time and might even be top 2 with Mob of the Dead for me. Grinding ranks and camos on this hectic ass map has been one of the most fun experiences I've ever had in zombies. BO4 was highly experimental and there were more misses than hits with its ideas, which is why, like Infinity Ward, they had to return to their stylistic origins. Cold War had one key design philosophy: going back to basics. Unlike Modern Warfare 2019, it served more as a soft reboot, being a stylistic return to its roots without completely retconning the old Black Ops timeline. It's a direct sequel to BO1 in setting and spirit. Campaign is also back and shares some elements and themes from the original. The Vietnam mission, the assault on the Russian base at Yamantau, the complete mindfuckery near the end where the brainwashing twist happens. There are also original ideas like detailing a backstory to your character, bringing back story choices through RPG-style dialogue trees that you can also use to learn more about your team's backstory. There are also side missions, and they were also leaning harder into the spy thriller aspects this time, like inspecting evidence you collected, and an entire KGB infiltration stealth mission with multiple choices to complete it in. You'll see why I'm highlighting this mission once we get to BO6. Multiplayer is interesting since there's various cards this game is trying to channel through from BO1 to the remnants of BO4 and a little bit of Modern Warfare 2019 also sprinkled in there. It's probably the most classic feeling card since World War II, but it wasn't that great to begin with, at least around launch. The launch map lineup ranged from mediocre to terrible. The visibility was so trash you often played Where's Waldo and attack light was almost necessary. It lacked some serious content on launch. Gunplay, animations and sound felt like a downgrade from Modern Warfare 2019. You can tell this game had to be quickly thrown together in 1.5 years during lockdown. It's a decent enough result considering the circumstances, but it's still very flawed. It's better now with the amount of maps, guns and new game modes for multiplayer and zombies that they added. Whatever game it is, they will never make me hate game modes like Infected or Prop Hunt. Or Gunfight. Zombies also has a bit of that back to basics mentality. All that confusing Apothecon, Primus Ultimus stuff has been finally wrapped up in Tag der Toten, and we're finally entering a new Dark Ether timeline with some new and old characters. Its gameplay and progression isn't as complex as BO3 or 4. It might be the most simple card Zombies has been since, well, BO1. A controversial change is what I call the warzonification of zombies. Okay, that sounds terrible. So things like weapon loot, rarities, multiplayer operators and viable kill streaks made it more unified with the rest of the package, rather than having it feel like its own complete thing stylistically how it used to be. I do prefer to how it was before, but I don't hate Cold War Zombies. It's the smoothest card Zombies has ever felt, but I need to lock in next time and bring some of its difficulty, interesting set locations and a dedicated crew back to its mode. It feels like a lot of the personality and charm from the original has been stripped. It does seem like they're trying to work on this problem though, little by little.
Who needs a Deadshot daiquiri or whatever the fuck that is?
A PC. Who'd they have to kill to get a GPU?
Cold War could have been way worse. It was obviously undercooked from the start of its life cycle. But luckily, if you give a developer 4 years of development time, it seems like they're able to return with one hell of a redemption arc. Black Ops 6 is shaping up to be one of the most ambitious cards in history. The graphics and colors have never looked better. The premise of a mysterious militia gaining US government control, forcing us to go rogue, sounds incredibly intriguing. There's now a much heavier emphasis on open-ended mission design, giving you more options to complete each task, with backdrops including the Gulf War, a political gala in Washington DC, or what I'm most excited about, doing a casino heist mission. The campaign length is also supposed to be more in line with classic card campaigns, so rather than the usual 4 hours they've been doing, we're looking at more than 6 to 8. Multiplayer looks entirely different from what Cold War initially was. A new omnidirectional movement system which allows you to sprint sideways, backwards, which is hilarious to see, but I want to see how that turns out. Dolphin diving has also been reworked, allowing you to 360 turn and shoot during the action, also while laying prone. It looks very reminiscent of those John Woo shootouts in his 90s Hong Kong films, or of course the Max Payne series, which was inspired by those movies. Matter of fact, I got an over an hour long dissection of the style of Kung Fu, John Woo's movies, and the entire Max Payne trilogy and other games it was inspired by. Just a shameless plug, you know? Discussion around zombies was mostly left out, as expected, but we still got some interesting details. There's gonna be 2 round-based maps on launch, Terminus Island, which we saw in the gameplay, and Liberty Falls. Terminus Island seems to be massive, is more complex and features a set crew to play with. The island is implied to be sort of a prison for the characters to make an escape from. I'm getting more of the Dead vibes from that one. Liberty Falls seems to be the most simple map around 90s Americana. It takes place in a town in the West Virginia mountains. It might be inspired by Transit, but I don't think it would be a flat out reimagining, remake or remaster of it. I'm only scratching the surface though. There's also the long awaited return of classic Prestige, Gobblegums and Zombies, a classic vertical UI being teased, HUD customization which has been overdue since BO4. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that we will be pre-ordering immediately. 80 euros? 80 fucking euros. You have to be smoking crack. Okay, I see Microsoft. You did this so I can go with the Game Pass option that's supposedly cheaper. I see what you're doing here. But if there's one thing you should take away from this video, is that the reason Treyarch is the most popular among the 3 is because they're the most willing to constantly innovate. And even at 50% of their power like in BO4 or Cold War, they can still deliver something that ends up being better than other recent games despite the circumstances. And with BO6 almost having 4 years of development clocked in at this point, I think they can deliver something special yet again. I just don't know about 80 euros worth of special. In Treyarch we trust. This almost sounds like I'm a part of a cult at this point.